Hey, friends, and welcome to this series of Shop Talk interviews that dives deep into the creative process of making comics, writing books, and adapting classic stories. My name is Lex Fajardo. I'm a cartoonist and the creator of the graphic novel series Kid Beowulf, an action adventure series that reimagines Beowulf and Grendel as twin brothers and follows their journey across Europe and Asia, encountering the world of literature and mythology. The newest book in the series is Kid Beowulf Odyssey, and it's kickstarting this month at kidbcomickickstarter.com, and it is the sponsor for this series of interviews. My guest today is L. Jenkinson-Brown, aka Jenks, a multi-talented writer, illustrator, comics maker, podcaster, and a teacher of classical civilization and ancient history. And she is the mind behind Greek Myth Comix, which is how I first discovered her work many years ago online doing research for my own books. Jenks does these very well-researched and easy-to-follow comics that explore fascinating ideas from antiquity and makes them very easy to digest. She is plugged into the classical world in a very fun way, and I wanted to pick her brain about all things the Odyssey, especially her brand new book, a choose-your-own-adventure style called Are Odysseus. So, without further ado, let's jump into my conversation with Jenks about all things Greek, myth, and comics.
So, Jenks, thank you so much for joining me on this shop talk about all things Greek, myth, and comics. Three of my favorite things, three of yours, I imagine, as well. And I think this is going to be very special for the folks who are coming in from my part of the universe, which are primarily, I think, comics fans and readers and of my work, and they may not be familiar with your own work. So, and I'm really excited to introduce them to what you do. For those who, like, how would you describe your work in the world for those who are not familiar with it?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. We've been chatting for years, and wow, I suppose so. I am in the UK, as you can probably tell by the fact I've opened my mouth, and I am a secondary school teacher so a high school teacher. So I teach years. My students they start off at age 11 and they leave school at aged 18. And in that time, I try and impress upon them the importance of classics and ancient history. So classics being ancient Greece and Rome, as it is taught on the specification. And I also teach a wee bit of Latin. But I used to be a literature teacher, an English literature teacher. So I've got quite a fairly big role in terms of impressing upon them the importance of stories and literature and the way those are told. And one of the things that I get to do is teach the Odyssey, or parts of it at the very least. So that's what I do in my day job. And then the rest of the time, for the last 11 or 12 years now, I've lost track, I've been making comics of them to try and help my students understand them a bit further, and primarily with little stick figures, because they're always really fun. Although they've gone from very little sketchy stick figures to kind of executive stick figures with proper clothing, and they're a really great handle for putting on all the ancient details and being able to really explain things with them. So I've been running Greek Myth Comix for a decade and a bit, and really pleased to say that the comics get used quite a lot in schools, but also universities, and people put them in their master's theses, and which is really lovely. And I've branched out onto social media a bit to just try and widen the view, I suppose. And then on top of that, I kind of end up, I get a bit distracted and think, oh, this will be a fun idea. And then I go and do that for like 6 years. So I was with my husband at an event, and we were reading a choose your own adventure style book. And we used to love those when we were kids in the 70s and 80s. I'll leave you to guess which one of those was me. And he said, oh, what if you turned the Odyssey, which I had turned into a, not exactly a graphic novel, but a comic book version in black and white, but with just explanations of all the details that you need to know for exams, and why Odysseus does what he does, and what are the background cultural details to all of these decisions and so forth. And he said, well, why don't you turn that into a choose your own path book? So I did that for 6 years and then published it last year, which is this one, as you were holding up your own copy a minute ago. Here's
Yeah.
my copy with the incorrectly spaced Homer on the front, the first edition. And as you can see, it turned into quite a wedge of a book. It's a great doorstop. It's a great, you can use it for weight training. It's half the weight of my daughter when she was born, which was about 2 years after I started writing it. And it has been so much fun seeing people read it and start to question their understanding of Odysseus and really understand why he does certain things, but also given the opportunity, what he could have done instead and what they want to do instead, which apparently seems to be get everyone home completely safe first time round. About 90% of people who read it and tell me say that they got home straight away, which says a lot about them, I think, in a nice way.
Right.
And then they said, right, I'm going to make some stupid and selfish decisions now. And that's when they start finding out what Odysseus does and why he does it. So it's been a really interesting publication to put out in the world and see what people make of it.
Well, yeah, no, I have my copy as I'll show it for those who are watching. You're right. It is a tome. It's a doorstop. It's 700 pages. I mean, this is just a massive undertaking. And it's fun to read in the choose your own adventure style, which I grew up in the 80s, and that's what I read and I loved them. And now you're doing it with one of my all-time favorite heroes. Yeah, I have a lot of questions specifically about this book and how you tackled it. And I guess maybe my first one would be just, well, oftentimes in adaptation, the author is trying to pare down to sort of get a succinct kind of, or not even succinct, but just carve away to the essence of the story. But it seems as I was reading this, you took like the whole of Homeric myth and then extant myth on top of that and put it all in here. So it is a really rich, like you've woven a really rich tapestry of stories that are not necessarily in Homer, but they're part of your story and Odysseus's story too. And I just wanted to ask, like, how did you arrive at? Was that something you arrived at immediately? Did you know, I've got to bring in all these other disparate elements to make this story work? Were you going to focus specifically on Homer? Like, how did you arrive at that decision?
Oh, well, thank you for enjoying it. But no, it did. I'm kind of one of those people who can't leave things alone and will find all the nitty-gritty details. But one of the things that does not bug me exactly, but as a teacher, I've always wanted there to be a really good and kind of like accurate Odyssey adaptation. And no one ever really knows what that would look like because the text itself was composed well after the events it's meant to be even vaguely describing, which are also largely mythological and supernatural. And whether or not it's set in the Bronze Age or not, it has archaic and classical, well, not quite classical, but still like elements in it as people have written it down and tweaked things probably for their own audiences. And I've always felt that it's sort of a work really of classical reception, and that it was a story that was passed down orally, that was then written, that was then copied, and what has happened to it on the way. But initially I started out thinking it would be, as usual, good for class, because I'm kind of, as a teacher, everything, I always really need everything to be educational. I like things to be fun also, but I felt like the purpose of it was to be educational. And so I wanted to include all the things that are important when teaching it. So the language, for example, the similes in there, the formulaic language, so that the poet can remember this entire text, or at least the parts of it we think might have been performed at different times. And then after I found that was absolutely fine and dandy, but people got home in 3 sections and then put it aside and didn't really get that much out of it, I thought, well, how could it be more enriching, but then also more fun and maybe a tad less educational? And thought, well, initially I had wanted to do You Are Odysseus, make Odysseus choices, and then You Are Telemachus and You Are Penelope. But then I spent so long on Odysseus, and then I realized actually there's so much more here that he could do. So yes, he could get home, but what if he then actually, there are descriptions in the first 4 books, chapters. When Telemachus, who we meet first, we don't even meet Odysseus till book 5. When we meet Telemachus and Athene comes to inspire him to go on a journey and find himself by finding out about his father, he visits Menelaus and Helen, and he visits Nestor, and he hears stories about his father from them, and also their experiences of the war. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting, what if Odysseus, given that Menelaus talks about what great friends they were and how much he loved him, and it's like kind of an adorable bromance, what if he did talk him into going out with Menelaus and said, what if he was a slightly different kind of Odysseus, and what if he ended up third wheeling around ancient down the Nile as a third wheel while Menelaus and Helen get their marriage back on track? And I thought that'd be really fun and really interesting for me, because I've never had the chance to research that aspect of ancient history or mythology. And then also Nestor says who got home and when, and so I thought, well, maybe that could be built in somewhere as well. Why does he go off and decide to mess with the Cocones on the way home when no one else does? And then it kind of grew from there. And having the basis of the story and knowing it so well, it was really interesting to then read it again with this focus on what choices he makes, because I started noticing all these little details I had missed, because they weren't necessarily things that I focused on while teaching. And I think it is possible to read the Odyssey time and time again and notice things that you just hadn't noticed before. Like you watch your favorite comfort show over and over, and then suddenly things are more meaningful the third time round. And so then you start to see patterns in the text as well, and just exactly how many women are involved in telling Odysseus where to go in many different ways. And then also thinking, well, what about all the characters that he doesn't mention and that Homer doesn't mention, like all the poor women stuffed in the hold who've been abducted from Troy? And what about all these voices of his crew that just die, or we're introduced to first so that we can kill them and they'd be meaningful, like Rob Elpenor, who we meet in the underworld, and then the underworld itself. So it suddenly lent itself to all these fantastic potential outcomes. And so what I then did, having written like a first draft and thinking, well, this is fun, but it's not as much fun as it could be, I sat down with some very large books of mythography and made Excel spreadsheets of every time Odysseus is mentioned in a myth, or Telemachus or Penelope, which I will come to later, hopefully. I still hope to write their versions of the story as well, although they're more linear. And then tried to track, so what could potentially happen? How could he also then insert into other myths that involve the characters from earlier, like Menelaus, and then like things that are told by later storytellers and later like tragedians, for example, and about what happened to Helen. So and so really I just sort of did what every, I suppose, classical reception does, which is look at what's come before and then try and use that to tell a new version of the story that is meaningful. But in this way, rather than it like being a reflection of the people who were maybe, no, it is a reflection, I suppose, of the people who were playing it, reading it. What I was going to say is every retelling is kind of a reflection of the time it's retold for and what the interests are at that time and what story it needs to be told. For example, with the huge and fantastic kind of glut suddenly of female character-centered retellings that there have been. This is a really great time to focus on those female characters. Kind of like Ovid actually started that with his Heroides. But it's nice, it's really great to bring that back. So I thought, well, everyone loves Odysseus. And like you said, he is often a lot of people's favorite character. And I think the reason why, out of the whole epic cycle, these 2 main poems exist out of what, 6 to 8 poems that tell the whole story of the Trojan War and why there was a Trojan War in the first place, and end with Odysseus kind of getting home. Why out of those only the Odyssey and the Iliad still are extant and exist, I think, is because they focus on one character each, whereas all the other stories focus on so many different characters and events, and they're almost like, they sound like, because we don't have them anymore, like they're almost lists of events happening. Whereas the Iliad really, really focuses on Achilles and his drama. And then the Odyssey focuses on this little guy who is a total git and lies to everyone's face and has really mixed motives for everything that he does, because he really, really, really wants to get home, but he really, really, really wants to have something to show for it when he gets there. And I think that's so very human. And that's why he seems to be so popular. Everyone loves a complicated character. And
Absolutely.
he's the most complex, even from that very first word that people argue over how to even translate, polytropos, where it's many-minded or complicated or whatever it is. But yeah, that was my focus. So every time he was mentioned, to try to get that in. What else could he do? What would he be likely to do given a different turn of the situation? And it's kind of, in a way, it started to write itself, because having read it so many times in the original, and I've got about 8 different translations as well that I've read from different, like I think the earliest one I've got is from about the 1700s and 1800s, and then up till I've got a great one from the 1930s, which is really rip-roaring, adventuring fun, and then the latest translations, just to see how does the character change, do the voices change, and what changes overall. And that then gave me the idea that whenever he does say he considered it in his great heart, whenever the poet says that Odysseus is making those choices, I could start, well, I know what choice he does make. Let's go off on that tangent. What if he had decided on the other one? What would likely be the thing to happen next? So yeah, thank you for saying that it is so full of all these aspects. And I really did want to ground it in actual ancient Greek culture and this idea of KUDOS and AIDOS leading to kleos, the glory forever, and doing the right thing and acting by the gods, which is the right thing to do, so that they don't punish you. And the theme of XENIA, hospitality, that is rife throughout the entire Odyssey and justifies, well, to the gods at least, and everything that Odysseus does. And so that you are meant to try and read it with that in mind, but you can go off and be a horrible version of the character instead.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. You know, as a reader, one of the things that I really enjoyed, and this might happen for you too, like if you're reading an adaptation or a translation, or you see a version of it, that moment in the text or the movie where like, oh, they've done their homework. And for me, like when I first was digging into You Are Odysseus, which, as you were just describing your process for it, it occurred to me like, oh, the Odyssey actually is the first. It's structured like a choose your own adventure already, in a sense, like the actual Homeric epic in that. And the fact that you mentioned like Penelope and Telemachus have more of a linear timeline, but Odysseus is just all over the place. So that just sort of struck me like, oh yeah, I could see how it just lends itself naturally to the form that you put it in. In any event, what I wanted to touch on was, like, as I was going through as Odysseus, I mean, I know the story very well, so I'm like, well, I'm not going to go and do the things he did because I already know sort of the outcome. I want to see what happens if I make the wrong choice. I got stuck with Menelaus for a really long time, going down the Nile, and that was sort of, yeah, you described it as a bromance. That's a good way to do it. But what I was struck by, and I think maybe it's when they're in Memphis, but there was just a moment, maybe it's like 2 sentences. They're at dinner, they're being, hosted by one of the many kings that they meet. And I think me as Odysseus, or the reader as Odysseus, catches a glimpse of a phantom Helen or something to that. And which reminded me of the story of the doppelganger, the phantom Helen, and maybe you can expound on this for some of the listeners who might not be familiar with it, because I'm probably going to get it wrong. But my memory was that there are some stories where when Paris abducted Helen, it wasn't even the real Helen. She happened to be in another part of the world, and everybody was fighting for 10 odd years over this phantom. Do I have that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Trying to oh Lord. Well, I was basing it on the play Helen, the Euripides' play Helen,
Right.
which
Yes.
sort of takes that story and makes it more well known for us, I suppose. But there's always different versions of myth, which is wonderful, because it it gives you a window on what people really wanted to believe, which myths then became popular, and ended up as these great poems or written down. And I love this idea that the sort of the classical tragedians and comedians were then doing classical reception and they take a myth that everyone knows, but they put a spin on it based on maybe a slightly left field myth. So this idea that it's not Helen, but her eidolon, a sort of phantom version of her, as you said, who is actually taken to Troy by Paris. It's a little bit like the story when the first man to commit the murder of a kinsman is Ixion, I think, king of the Lapids, and he's expelled from the Lapith tribe. And then Zeus looks after him. So this is in the age of when mortals and gods kind of live more closely together, but the humans are always trying to like see how far they can push the gods, and this is why you've got like Sisyphus and Tantalus and Tartarus, because they push the gods too hard. And Ixion, having been given shelter by Zeus and made his guest, he then tries to sexually assault Hera, and Zeus sees what's about to happen and swaps Hera out for a cloud, Nephele, who he makes in her shape, which is a bit like this idea that Paris takes Helen, but it's not really Helen, it's the swapped out form of Helen, this eidolon, this mysterious phantom version of her. So I thought it's kind of like that Ixion story as well. And then that's where the centaurs come from, by the way. So Ixion's child with the cloud creates Centaurus, who goes off and mates with the mares on I
don't think wow, I didn't know that.
Fun, lovely, the cloud-born centaurs. But yeah, so this idea then that Helen is actually transported down to Memphis and lives in Egypt for 10 years. And Menelaus on his way back is like shipwrecked in Euripides' tragedy and finds Helen, and it's the real Helen. And there's this moment where you get the description from her maid saying she's the other Helen has disappeared. So I tried to include that. So it's a bit of an Easter egg, really, if you go there and you see this happening, and then like, which one is the real Helen? And you get to speak.
It was great. It was so much fun.
I'm really glad you liked that.
Yeah, and you do that throughout the different strands of the story. The challenge for me was I didn't have enough bookmarks because I would go down one strand and then, holding the page I was just at with my finger as a bookmark and going back and forth, so that was the only.
Loved to publish it in a hardback with lots of ribbons, so you could put a ribbon in. Maybe one day we'll get to publish it like that. That'd be really nice. But I did make a little set of bookmarks that you can download and make and put together, and they open up so you can write your choices in. So I've popped them on my website somewhere. They're like little black and white ones with illustrations from the book in them, so you can put them in, and then they sit on top of the books. They've got a little flat bit at the top, so they hold your place really nicely. I figured there was a need for bookmarks, but yes, I definitely think you need bookmarks for this one.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I was struck by reading this is, and in all the adaptations I've read, like you really lean into this, which is striking, like the amount of time Odysseus spends in a place. Like, through the Odyssey, he just sort of, they talk about the many years on Calypso's island or Circe or what have you, but it's just in a sentence. But like reading it in your text, it's like he's like, I was stuck with Menelaus for months, and then it dragged into years, and like this idea that everything is so expanded and it's far, it takes time to get from one place to another. So just I was impressed that you really leaned into that. And was that conscious, or what was your choice for that?
Well, one thing that I was kind of distressed that I couldn't do is use the same narrative structure as the original text, where we start off with Telemachus and then we meet Odysseus, and he's been on Calypso's island for 7 years, and it sort of starts in the middle of things, in medias res. And I couldn't do that because you had to make the decisions as to whether you would get there. So I had to start at Troy, which is what most adaptations apparently do, although apparently Nolan is going to do the actual structure, which is very exciting, and not start with Troy like so many other adaptations have done. So I really did want to make it very clear, like how those 20 years have been spent. 10 years have been spent in the war, and then there are 10 years, and he gets back in the original text at exactly the right moment. Telemachus has just got back. He has avoided being murdered. His mother is finally about to make her decision as to whether she will marry one of the suitors and let the suitor be king, or will she give up her throne to her son, who is just coming of age. She has just decided that she is going to set the challenge for the suitors, and Odysseus is there to kill them all when they fail. So if you miss that window, you are stuffed, basically. So there is also, I don't know if you've read that far, if you do mess around with Menelaus and then you try and go home and it's been more than 10 years, it's not a pretty you come back
okay,
to.
no, I have. Okay.
And in fact, I did actually write one version where there is, in fact, a Euripidean tragedy, a mini tragedy in verse in there for you to find, should you end up making horrible decisions and getting back far too late. But then with Menelaus, I was like, well, how on earth has he spent 7 years? I couldn't work out. He says it takes him 7 years to get home. Like, how? So there's a wonderful website called Orbis, I think is based at Stanford University, and you are able to plot journeys in the ancient world, specifically the Roman world, but you're able to plot journeys between certain points, and it can work out for you how long it might have taken by road, if there were roads. Obviously, I didn't use roads because we didn't have those in the period that I'm writing about, but by ship. But it also, in a way, you have to take into account then as well that so much of the year you cannot sail, and that people did not sail for quite more than half of the year was deemed unsafe. So you would, if you were still at sea, be holed up somewhere else until the storms stop raging or until it's safe enough to go. And you would be island hopping. So when he finds himself in the middle of the sea, that is Supernaturalville, because they literally do not know where this is or where they are. There are no maps. It is literally just go from place to place. Every time you end up in a new place, they have to take on water and food. So it gives you an idea that your ship is not big enough to sustain everyone for a longer voyage. So you would naturally spend longer getting anywhere. But yeah, trying to make Menelaus's journey spin out to fit 7 years was actually quite difficult. So I really did lean into every single place that he mentioned. I tried to plot it on a map as to where realistically it could be. It's easier with the Nile because a lot of those places were real places and not supernatural. I think the island that he ends on with Menelaus, when he with Menelaus then has to take on the old man of the sea, I think that is actually the island of Pharos that later on they built the Pharos on outside Alexandria, which is a really nice tie-in. But then, so you know exactly where these places are, and then you're like, well, how? You could see your home from there. So I was looking into what the tides are like, and would it be really difficult to sail around? And in the end, I thought, well, let's look at Menelaus and Helen's relationship. She's at this point also pretty annoyed that Odysseus is there. So why don't they just go off on their own and leave Odysseus to babysit, which I thought would be fun. But I did also include a fair bit of Aeneid references from book 1, book 2 of the Aeneid, where Aeneas meets Dido from Phoenicia and Tyre. And I thought that would be really interesting to build in as an additional I do love Virgil, and I do teach Virgil too. And it is meant to be happening contemporaneously with Odysseus' journey. I mean, Aeneas is literally following in Odysseus' footsteps. He even at one point ends up on the island of the Cyclopes. He doesn't meet them, but he finds someone that Odysseus apparently left behind and didn't notice. And he tells them all about it. So I thought it'd be too good not to, to miss out on this almost like the murder mystery that's happened in Tyre. Sichaeus is dead. What's happened to Dido? What her brother Pygmalion has done. So I kind of thought at this point, I want to make this as fun as possible for any lover of myth, so that like when you were reading it, you noticed that and you went, oh, I know where that's from.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you made it really accessible, which I would imagine being an educator was also part of your task. And yeah, so folks should not be intimidated by the density of it.
No.
they'll be rewarded by that.
Unlikely you will not read it page by page. I mean, you can,
Right.
but you'll be a terrible mess. So when you see it as a book like that, I did worry that people would be put off. But once you get in, you say turn to this page, and then you're in the middle of the text, and then you're finding your way through. You'll read maybe in one version of a story, I would say a quarter of that, perhaps, maybe slightly more, depending on the decisions that you make or the bits that you skip. So hopefully it's not too intimidating. But there is also an ebook version where it's a lot less weighty for those with difficulties holding larger books, and you can click the link and it will take you to the page instead.
Oh, hyperlinks. That's smart.
Yeah. And then I made the audiobook podcast version of just the main storyline. So then you can just listen to it, because so many people had asked me to turn it into an audiobook, and I really wanted to. And a few people approached me about turning it into a game, which would again be absolutely lovely, to even as like a little app, and you can play through it and have your alternative choices, maybe with some images or some text or some narration. But it just, I didn't have the capability to really do that, or the funds to put into that myself. So I thought, well, the main thing about this book is making the Odyssey accessible. So I will just go with that storyline, but I've included the choices, especially the ones that are in the original text as well. So when you get to a certain point, it says, well, what will you do? And it gives you the choices, and it gives you a moment to think about what you would do. And then there's a little sound to tell you that the time is up, and the story continues, and you see what choice he's made. So then you can start going, what? Why did you do that? You should have done the other thing, which will be hopefully people shouting it into space as they listen to it. And at the moment, that's been releasing every Tuesday for the last 8 weeks. So there's 2 episodes left of this season. So he's going to get to Ithaca at the end of episode 10. And then I will release season 2 in Ithaca a bit later on this year, and then hopefully coincide with him killing everybody at Christmas. Why not have a Christmas massacre?
It was interesting because I've been listening to the podcast too, which is a great companion. I think I at first I was struck like, oh, why aren't we doing the choose your own adventure? But then I understood, like, oh no, this makes sense, that you're sort of taking us through your version of the Odyssey we know, and then inviting readers to dip into all the other places they could go. And so it's lovely listening. And you've actually done a fair amount of production work. Like, you have sound effects, there's music, you're narrating it. It's really well produced. And how challenging was that where are you getting all these extras, like, to do this?
I shopped around for quite a long time to see how would this be possible, because I thought just me reading it, people say I have a nice voice, but I thought I needed a bit more. I want to make it a bit more immersive and exciting. So I found a really great website that allows you to pay for a subscription for a certain amount of time, so that you have the copyright to the sounds that you use if you publish it within that time frame. So I have like a certain amount of time that I need to do this in, so that I don't have to pay another subscription. But I like learning new skills, and I hadn't done that before. I'd messed with it a bit, making videos for YouTube out of some of my old videos. So essentially I downloaded Audacity and got a decent microphone, and then just messed with it. And I've been messing with it for about 6 months, which is a bit longer than I thought it would take, to be honest. But I kind of realized sometimes there are moments when just maybe a little suggestion of the surrounding will do. But then sometimes there are moments that when I was writing the book version, and then when I was reading it out, I thought, well, the whole, like with Homer, the way he manages, or if he existed, the way the poet manages to get the audience to visualize what's happening when they don't have experience of cannibal giants or bird women singing, is he will use similes, epic similes, really detailed ones that give you not just a visual, but maybe an audio clue, and then some foreshadowing as well. And our version of that is television, and showing people what is happening so they can visually understand it and take that in. But without the visuals, there is only sound. And I just really wanted certain moments to really hit home. So when the Lystragonians are wrecking the fleet, I made quite quite a detailed soundscape for that in the end was actually a bit harrowing. So, but he's on a cliff, so I like made it a bit, I muffled it a bit, so he's listening to it while he's watching it and quite distant from it. And then moments like in the cave of the Cyclops as well. I mean, Homer uses amazing similes to describe the stabbing out of Polyphemus's eye, and there's the hiss and the sizzle like someone plunging red hot metal into water. And there's also the simile as well of the visual of Odysseus twisting it like he's a carpenter with a drill. So there's already that there, but I think a modern audience responds better to a little bit more telling what to hear, and so I did want to illustrate that a bit more, and so it ended up taking on a bit of a life of its own, rather like the book took me 6 years to write.
Right.
I only have, because I have my day job, I only have, say, 1 or maybe 2 days a week, a couple of hours a week on those days really to work on either project. So it's everything time sort of expands.
Yes, absolutely. No, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah,
I have the same thing with the day job, and then your other projects are sort of put together piecemeal, and so they become protracted, and you're just trying to get into a rhythm and put it out as best you can. Well, I would definitely recommend folks listening to this to subscribe to your podcast on Spotify. I'm sure it's in all the other channels they can get it.
Anywhere you listen to your podcast, you should be able to find it. Same title as the book.
And the title is You Are Odysseus. And I would also urge them to pick up the book too, because you just mentioned the Cyclops episode from the podcast, but I was just reading the Cyclops multi-episodes, or places you could go in your book are really fun, especially if you make the wrong choices. Odysseus does not make it out, but you can sort of, as a reader, you're having a lot of fun. You're delighting in Odysseus's missteps, therefore, or the reader's missteps, and it's fun to read that. But which brings me to this other component that's at the beginning of your book, and you open every episode of the podcast with it, and you touched on it in an earlier part of our conversation, but I wanted you to expand on it for listeners who might not be familiar with it. The idea of, because you frame it like, as you're so good in the idea of the maps and the historicity and all the different elements that you put together to build this book, but it's framed around this idea of Kleos and KUDOS and NOSTOS and XENIA, which are paramount to the Homeric hero. Can you, for those of us who aren't familiar with those ideas, is there a brief explanation of how they work and function?
Well, I do have some comics on this as well.
Yes, that's right.
True, in fact, because we were studying the Iliad, and it's like, well, what is the motivation of these characters? So the idea seems to be, especially in the Iliad, which then leaches into the character that Odysseus has become by the end of the Trojan War, this idea that you act in order to gain KUDOS, which is sort of good reputation, the things that you do that are correct, the way that you act in the right way by the gods, it gives you this good reputation. You might also have AIDOS, which is like a fear of doing the wrong thing, but you could think of it as shame, or you could gain AIDOS by like doing shameful acts. That's the wrong way to act. So to give you a little example, it could be like, so Odysseus does many things to gain KUDOS. He wins over people. He speaks well in the assembly. He has great ideas. He comes up with the idea for the horse and gets Epirus to make it. He's always the one they send off to talk to people. He gains his KUDOS that way. He also does things that perhaps might gain him AIDOS, or rather things that suggest AIDOS is a slightly trickier subject, so I tend to simplify it by saying you either gain KUDOS or you gain AIDOS, which is not strictly correct, but the idea is like good reputation, bad reputation. So losing 600 men, this is not great.
Right.
And the whole idea is going to add up to you having Kleos, which is glory, honor, renown forever. The Odyssey is literally the Kleos of Odysseus. And then the other really important things are the nostos, the wanting to get home, which is the root of the word nostalgia, the pain of the past, although that word, in fact, is not actually ancient Greek, which I realized a few years ago. It's actually 18th century which is really fun, but it's based on the ancient Greek word nostos. The idea that you want to get home. So for example, when you reach the lotus eaters, they are not actually a physical threat, but they are a threat to the men by removing their nostos, by drugging them with accidentally. They're being hospitable, but like in a really negative way. So it's a really fun play. The final theme, which is Xenia, which is hospitality. And this is such an important idea. And people argue about this all the time as to whether Odysseus does this correctly. But when you write down every single time hospitality is given, you find that all the people who survive the Odyssey give good hospitality, and all those who do not, like eat their guests or ask their guests who they are or accuse them of piracy or thievery or something similar, or steal from their guests, like Paris steals Helen from Menelaus, right? Because she's property. That is bad, Xenia. I like to say they break Xenia. They break this rule. And Zeus is the god of Xenia. And so that is why at the end, when the suitors who have turned up as guests, fine, expected to be fed, fine. But then they don't leave. And then they plot to kill their host's son. Athene basically tells Odysseus, you are going to kill them all. There is no way out of that. And so he does. And that is entirely justified in the text by Athene, who has said, I'm acting on behalf, essentially, of Zeus. So people also argue, well, Odysseus ate some of the cheese in Polyphemus's house, and so he broke Xenia. But really, the argument is, well, he brought a gift. He was expecting Polyphemus, anyone who was a shepherd, to be slightly civilized in his version of that word, as in like him, and thus obey the rules of the gods. And so they would have been home to expect guests, and so if the guests aren't there, well, we brought a gift, so we'll just take the food that we're likely to be given. So no Xenia broken on Odysseus's part. And then Polyphemus turns up, goes, who are you? Are you pirates? Where are the rest of your ships? Never mind, eats his men. I think he breaks Xenia a little bit more. But it's really fun to argue these things and then include that in the text. So which gift do you bring? And are you the Odysseus who is clearly looking down on everyone and thinks they won't be particularly important, and thus you'll bring the wrong? Yeah, he brings a really valuable gift, right? Which is also the strongest wine available to get plot point, get a giant drunk. But so yeah. Those are the really key tenets. There are other themes as well in the text, like justice, and that is sort of links into the Xenia theme. But I think those are the most important ones when you are reading as Odysseus, I think, and trying to work out who he is.
Yeah, no, those it's a great description of all those tenets, and again, to your podcast, you open each episode with that framework to remind the listener, the reader, how important they are. And reading the text, your book, it reminds me a little bit of those video games where you have the character and you can choose the path, and therefore you can do right or you can do bad, or and it affects the story. And for the life of me, whenever I play, it's really hard for me to be bad, and I would like to be bad, but I don't know what the issue is, but it's just hard for me to go down that path.
I did the same thing. I played the whole of Assassin's Creed Odyssey the first time, just being nice.
Yeah,
I didn't even want to fight anybody. I just want to look at this. Stop fighting me. And the same. But so you're in. Like I said, everyone who's read it and wants to tell me, say they got home. They did the nice thing too. But they thought they were doing the right thing. A lot of them, they thought they were doing what Odysseus does.
Yeah, and so to do it right, you almost have to be Odysseus. You have to be a little duplicitous. You have to be a little hard-edged.
But that's it.
A little selfish.
Not black and white.
This Shop Talk episode is brought to you by the books we make. Order Kid Beowulf Odyssey at kidbeatcomickickstarter.com. Order You Are Odysseus at bookshop.org. Now, back to the interview.
I wanted to ask you if you had a particular favorite translation that you sort of come back to, or sort of the way that your own book has revealed different sides of the Odyssey to me as a reader. If there's a translation that's done that for you, over the years? One that is a prized translation on your bookshelf, or?
Well, the one that's falling apart with rereading is my teaching copy, which is the Rue, which I do love, and I think it is a great version for teaching with, because it's in prose, which I think is just a bit more accessible, although it does really, it reuses words often, so you know when the formulaic phrases are, and it's kind of simplistic in its language, but I don't think it loses too much out of the similes. So I like it for that reason. But then reading the Emily Wilson was fantastic because it's written completely differently. It's really sparing in its language. It tries to stick to what the translator has said, it arguably is like the definitive meaning of those words, without adding layers of modern or even not that recently modern sort of, what's the word? Oh God, sorry. I was just going to point out that I'm melting in a heat wave in the UK at the moment. My brain is kind of connotations. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. So yeah, just trying to edge it back. So that was really interesting. And then in between that, I've got my W.D. Rouse Boy's Own Adventure version, where he writes all the voices, but each voice is kind of Dickensian in a way, in that they've all got like accents, and the slaves speak differently to the noble people who are terribly posh, in a very Oliver Twist kind of scenario. And I just thought that was really funny, but also really accessible, because it is meant to be at heart an adventure story. This wasn't meant to be a story for just rich, educated people. It was a myth for everyone. And that's why it's got similes in it that tell us about the most basic aspects of life, like farming, and as well as fighting, and the role of women. Like the similes in Homer are probably my absolute favorite thing to look at, because they are so illustrative of life at the time, probably when it was written rather than when it was composed or when it was even about. But even so, there are certain things that probably didn't change over millennia. And I think to find a really good translation, it's a good idea to look at the way those similes are translated and see how much you get from those, I think. And that gives you an idea of how much the translator has really understood those concepts too.
Right. That's a great point. I'm curious, in your role as a teacher, sorry, tell me the grades again that you're teaching.
So I teach, so in the UK, we've got years 7, 8, and 9, key stage 3. So that's pre-exams. So they're 11 when they're in year 7, and then they're 14 when they're in year 9. And then their GCSEs take over 2 years 10 and 11. Because we're counting up from primary school here. So they get to secondary school and they're year 7, but year 6 to when they're back in primary school. It's very convoluted, I'm sorry. A GCSE stands for, someone asked me this the other day, and I'm like, do I know? Yeah, I do know what this means. General Certificate of Secondary Education. Very bland, literally high school certificate. And you get one of those in each of your main subjects, but you can also do elective subjects like Latin, like classics, that are not your core subjects, which would be English and history and science and maths and that kind of thing. And then after that, you're 16 to 18, that's your A levels, and that's pre-university entry. So those are the things that then get you specialize in 3 subjects or 4, and then you go off to university after that. So I teach key stage 3, 11 to 19. So I can teach kind of what I want really on the ancient syllabus. So we teach Latin, and then we teach classics, so that they can see aspects of Greek and Roman life. And also classics is such an enormous subject. It's got mythology, but then it's also got material culture and aspects of language and culture. Sorry, I said that twice. Archaeology. So we try and give them a taster of all of those things. And then the GCSE syllabus is a set syllabus that everyone who does it does the same things. And the Odyssey is one of the options on that. And it ties in then with a topic on the Mycenaean world. So we get to study Mycenae and Tiryns and look at the Minoan Mycenaean frescoes, which is really interesting, seeing as it's like a counterpoint to Homeric texts, which is my favorite topic, really.
Well, when you get students, I'm just curious, are they... Because for me, when I grew up as a kid, I was introduced to the Greek myths and devoured them in different storybooks and whenever, and read and reread them, and I sort of made, and that became my entry point for my love of Marvel comics and superheroes. So I sort of started with the core, classical heroes and moved in. But I'm just wondering, like, if do your students have that kind of, do they have any knowledge of the heroes? Like, where are they coming from? What's their primary text? Are you their primary introduction to the world? How are they getting?
Lately, it seems that they know less than they have. It really ebbs and flows. So I've been a teacher it's 20 years this year, actually. It's 20 years in September.
Oh.
It's a long time. So I've seen a lot of change in students and how they access information and how they access the world. Mobile phones and social media have been massive. Well, they've kind of ruined it, really, because they're less interested in outside and they're more interested in here. But that is now, they're moving away from that, which is really, really interesting. And I found now that my students are more like they were 20 years ago, where they did actually read and they sought things out in the library, and they didn't just wait for information to come to them, which I think is what the advent of phones and social media has kind of done. But we've got this sort of the traditional way in is still do I have him on the show? No, I have him somewhere. It's still a certain Percy Jackson for quite a lot of students.
Oh.
I think Percy Jackson came out the year after I started teaching, so I totally missed out on that, but I started to see it come through so that I could correct all the things that they had learned incorrectly from that. I will one day read them all, but that's really key. Disney's Hercules and other sort of Greek myths is another one that they love to say, oh, I've seen that and this happens in this, and oh no, what do you mean it's not true? And he kills her after that story. It's a fun way in. You remember
Right.
He's dead now. And just ruining childhoods all over the place. But I do like as well introducing them to really old, like the Ray Harryhausen animations is really fun. We put that on an open day. Sometimes like it's our kind of fate day at the end of the year, and they show off what they've learned and we watch things together. Other things as well. So there have been a lot more, as I said, Greek myth retellings really in the last decade, and very much so in the last few years. But there's also a lot of children's books that are focusing on those as well, which is really great, really fun retellings of Hercules or other mythologies as well. My daughter loves Norse mythology, thanks to Louis Stoll, author of the Loki books. And so that's where she particularly loves, that's her mythology that she's really in love with. And I'm not even sure where mine came from, because I'm Irish by descendancy. That's the wrong word. My parents are Irish, and so I was brought up on Irish myths and stories, Tír na nÓg, and I think, but I was also brought up in London, and we didn't have a lot of money, so we went to museums all the time because they were free. So I think I kind of caught the ancient history bug before I caught the mythology bug.
I was curious about the building blocks of the Greek myth and comics for you. Like if it started with comics, if it started with mythology. It sounds like it started with the archaeology, perhaps.
I did. I think I did it backwards, really. I used to go and hang out with a mummy in the British Museum called Ginger, because I'm ginger, and so it was my and I was fascinated, like, you can see it in there. And now I look back on that with kind of slight horror, that it is weird that we keep dead people in museums to look at. I'm still struggling with working out whether that's okay. I kind of feel like maybe it isn't, but as a child, you kind of go, oh, well, this is what grown-ups do, so it must be okay. So I'm gonna hang out in the Egyptian museum because Egyptian stuff's really cool. But then found my way to the Greek museum and the Roman museum, and living in Britain, we have such Roman ancestry and loads of sites to look at. But I think then I did classics for A level because it wasn't available as a GCSE at the school I was at, but I did Latin as an additional subject. I was at a state school, and so they offered it as like an extra class, an elective that you had to do before and after school, and you could get a qualification in it. So I did that, and I guess that kind of changed my life, really. It sent me spiraling off, and then I did classics for A level. I went to a different school just so I could do it, and I was introduced to ancient Greek plays and the Iliad and Odyssey, and also the actual life of people in the classical world of ancient Greece and Rome. and then decided I would do it at university, even though I was absolutely terrible at Latin because I didn't know what a verb was. I spent like 5 years struggling through, and I didn't really understand grammar because they just didn't teach grammar in the 80s in Britain because it was too bourgeois. So I didn't know what a verb was. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I have common sense, and that will get me through. So I started doing it then as a degree, and then thought, I'm not sure I'm getting a lot out of it. So I switched back to my other great love, which is English literature. But I did both, and then worked as a bookseller, stumbled my way into a teaching qualification, and ended up teaching English and classics at a lovely school in Hampshire where I still am. And that's what happened. So the comics bit, I didn't come to comics until I was in my late 20s, if you can believe that. And I started eating them up. It was a great comic store in Notting Hill, and I started going there and buying them and looking people up and like seeing your work much later as well. And and then everyone loves drawing stick figures as a kid. So I thought, well, that will be a good way in because I'm an okay artist, but if I want to draw these things fast and quick, and they're mostly for demonstrating formula, which was the main thing we were working on, like how does an Aristeia work in the Iliad? What are the steps to going on this huge blood sport spree in the battle?
I will cop to your diagrams are great. And every time you put up a new one, I download it quickly, print it out because I know I'm going to reference it.
Well, that is really cool. I mean, I do worry though, like with that, I worry that they're getting a little bit wordy. There's not enough pictures in that one. I'm going to do a pictorial version.
It's great on tabloid size. So
but that is
works.
The point. The idea is because I stick them up on the website, and then people can just download them and put them in their PowerPoints or print them off for school or have them in their folder. My students have them in their folders when I'm teaching. It's like, right, so here's a bit of background here, because it is a lovely, fast and visual way to elucidate on a subject without then having to go on for an hour, and they can access that on their own without having to be able to be taught it. They can go away and read it and come back and discuss anything that they found hard. And that I get them to make their own comics sometimes as well, because dual coding, putting a picture with an idea, is just so fantastic for memory. And I have a terrible memory, so I know this from experience. But yeah, I literally only started doing it because I thought it would help in class, and I'm really glad that it does help in class and elsewhere as
well. And it's great that it was born out of, like, as you say, it was to help the students understand the topic. And in the 20 odd years you've been teaching, and the 20 odd years probably matches the 20 odd years I've been doing comics and graphic novels, there's been at least in this country, it was slow going, but an embrace and primarily because of teachers and librarians of graphic novels in the classroom to do exactly what you're saying. And it's been a huge boon for the kids, for the creators, for just the medium in general. So as a creator, it's been great to see that, and it's great to see. And I would, again, recommend the folks listening to go to your website, because there's a lot of great material to get to. These diagrams are terrific. The other one that I have the one here about XENIA, which you.
Oh, I'm really glad
explained.
You have that one. Thank you.
And then this one's really fascinating. This is the Anabasis and the Catabasis. The trip to the underworld.
That was for the last 5 years, a friend and I were running CLASSICS-TOBER. We thought it would be a fun version of Ink, because Inktober, I don't know what really happened there, but we thought, well, we'll do a classics one, which
I have tried to do myself, but they're in some of the prompts are like so specific, like I can't draw that. So
the first year we
tried
about it. Really open, because we came up with it with 2 days notice. So that we'll do really open prompts, and the next year we'll do, let's do something more specific. I think we did like women in mythology, and then the year after that we did ones that were like specifically chthonic, like underworldly stories, and then And then we're like getting a bit exhausted at this point, and the world is just so tired. So we did one where we actually just we thought of we got a load of ancient historians and archaeologists and teachers to pick out a prompt and authors and tell us about a person from the ancient world. So we did those, which was a bit less effort, so everyone could just read about it instead. And then we thought, well, I think everyone's a bit tired of it now, but it was a really fun ride. But what's great is out of that was born things like these comics. It actually inspired me to write and draw more, which was a relief, because sometimes I have so many ideas and I can't get them all done. I'm sure you feel the same. Yeah. And so it was actually nice to tell myself, no, I have to draw this one today and only this one. So that was kind of nice. And then out of that also the art zine Sing O Muse was born, which was rather lovely thing. We're coming up to our third, which will be our final zine, which is a whole load of artists who were doing Classics-TOBER brought together by another artist who's become a friend of mine, Michael Bucci. So it was nice. It's brought a lot of people together and did a lot of beautiful images, because there are so many artists working, not in comics necessarily as well, but also in just visual imagery and making fantastic artwork of the ancient world, a lot of which is fantastically accurate in terms of clothing and setting, and is beautiful to look at as well, but also some of which is really inspiringly different and reinterpretive and exciting, like what you do with Kid Beowulf, and bring in all these fantastic stories into this one story of these two great characters. And I grew up with Beowulf and Grendel, so that was obviously like kind of a delightful thing. Nice. when you introduced me to them.
I studied classics like you in college. That was my focus, and it was Hellenist. Although my ancient Greek I was horrible at it then. I'm horrible at it now, but I've always carried this love of the classics. And where I'm going with this is that I'm seeing Classics-TOBER. What you brought was super cool, and I love. I primarily see your work through your Instagram now. Twitter, I'm not on there anymore, but you were very active there back in the day. I guess I love that you're so plugged into the classics community, which seems to be very vibrant online and elsewhere. And I just sort of look at it as sort of from afar, like, oh, I love the classics community. I want to be part of that, but I always feel like my stuff is a little too far afield. It's a little too. I'm trying to bring in some of those illusions that are so important to the text that we study, but it's also a little commercial. So I struggle myself sometimes to find that balance of making it, well, like your book, a fun, accessible book, bringing in all the classical stuff that's there, and just getting people aware of these great stories. That's not really, there's no question there. It's just, I love that you're so dialed into the classics world. And I guess that's just by dint of your approach to doing these diagrams and bringing it into your classroom and all that good stuff. So, yeah, like I said, there's no question there. Just a thought. But I do have a couple of other better questions for you. Specifically, you'd mentioned it earlier on, and I actually had this question because you seem to be part of a great tradition of women who work with antiquity. I'm thinking of like Rosemary Sutcliffe and Mary Renault, like they're great books, and then you've got Mary Beard, who's a scholar, and I think in the last few years there's been a resurgence in this. Madeline Miller with Song of Achilles and Circe, and then there's Natalie Haynes, who does great stuff. I'm reading Pat Barker's Women of Troy series right now, which is great. And then, if you go into a bookstore, there's just a cartload of new books. Like somebody wrote a book about Jocasta, somebody wrote a book about Medusa, and they're all, female authors. And I think that's a really interesting, I don't want to say trend. It's just sort of, it's a thing. And I wanted to know what if you had a POV about that, if that it seems to be like there's such an interest in antiquity and these great interpretations of it, but from a very specific female lens. And if you can speak to that, if there's a question there, like, why do you think that is? I don't know.
Well, first of all, I'm so flattered to be in the list of these lovely, and you're right, there are some amazing women writing, and like you say, though, there have been like it's not a new thing, but I suppose yes, the volume perhaps has certainly increased, and I think, as with everything, there's probably more than one answer to it. I'm sure part of it is that women's voices are always underheard, even now, and there's always pushback when they are heard, and often the best people to talk about women's voices are women, because often they will specialize as well in the research into those areas of them. And I know some fantastic women who are women and female identifying people who are really researching the roles of women in the ancient world, specifically in myth, in reality, and looking at what women's lives were like, because they don't get written about by the ancient authors, really. And often female characters or female people who existed are very much written off or slandered. So it is a really exciting space to explore. And then also there's fashion, I think, as well, in that when something works and there is clearly a taste for it, that need needs to be filled. And so that has encouraged a lot of excellent writers who have an interest to pursue that. And they've been ever so successful with it, which is great, because then it means you have all this fabulous material to read and explore and get on board with. And I often feel bad that I'm not actually writing about the roles of women. I'm still writing about Odysseus. I've kind of flouted that, not exactly a trend, but I flouted that a little bit. But I did want to reflect that there are not just men in those ships that get eaten by the Laestrygonians. There are, who knows how many people focus on the 600 men. Who knows how many women were in the hold? We talk about the spear prizes. That's the part of the entire plot of the Iliad revolves around the spear prize, the women who have been abducted and taken and kept as property. And then Penelope, I mean, what is fantastic about the Odyssey is actually there are so many women in it, female characters and women in it. And one of the traditional essay topics that comes up is women in the Odyssey, help or hindrance, discuss. And then you're like, so let's pick out the women that we've talked about. There's Calypso, there's Circe, there's Penelope, there's everything. There's Nausicaa. Is she a hindrance? Does she want to marry him? And then there's well, Scylla and Charybdis, technically female. Let's write about them too. But there are so many women. I think there's possibly more. No, there's easily more women characters who speak than there are male, I'm sure. And that, I don't know, I don't think I'd really noticed that until I started making the profile images for each episode of the podcast audiobook thing, because I was like, I'm able to put a different female character on the front of every single one without repetition, which is amazing. And that really hammered that home for me. So yeah, so I think, the women have always been there. And some people forget this. And often it's nice to hear about what their life was like, and whether it's from a simile about a woman tending the fire, or a woman who has lost everything and now faces being a slave, those are so illustrative, or whether it's an actual character who has a great role. Penelope is one of the most fantastically written female characters, because she is so thoughtful and clearly a match for her husband. I mean, she wouldn't pass the Bechdel test, but then who would in ancient Mediterranean, really, when women were, chattel. So yeah, very roundabout answer to your question, as all of my questions have been roundabout and terribly sweaty. I'm sorry, but it is a fantastic time to be a female interested in the ancient world, I think, right now.
Yeah, no, I love that level of just. I can think of more female writers and scholars of antiquity than I can of male off the top of my head, and that's just going to be because my bookshelf has them. but I just love that level of ownership because it's just a different. They're just pointing out things that I've missed, prior. I'm in the middle of Pat Barker's Women of Troy, and it's sort of from Briseis's point of view, which is I highly recommend it. It's a fun read.
I've got a
and
or like well, I say a pile, it's a trolley. I have so many because reading them is a little bit like work sometimes. I'm just saving them for when I'm not writing myself and I don't want to repeat any ideas, but I am so excited to read them when I'm finally finished. And yeah, I have so many collected, the Claire Hayward ones as well, and yeah, there's so many great
no, it's a great time to be a reader if you love that material. So and it's a great time to be a fan of the Odyssey because we're this is the summer of the Odyssey, and I want to ask you about Christopher Nolan's that's coming, and I've seen some of your posts on your Instagram. But before we get to that, I want to know, because I was listening to some of your other podcasts, and is there a version adaptation and in terms of movie or TV that you think was done well, or that you like, or that there are elements that, like, if you had to rate some of them, what comes in top for you?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I talk about this a lot. I think that the best one, and I obviously have the whole like for teaching in class in the back of my head, but like I think only because I think I know you need to appreciate it, right? It deserves to be appreciated. So you need a retelling, a media retelling that also appreciates it. And I think the best one, even though it is terrible in so many ways, is the 1996 or 7 miniseries, The Odyssey, which is like, I think it's
with Armando Sante.
Yeah,
that's so funny. I was chatting with Gareth Hines, and he listed that one too.
Yeah.
So,
I have Gareth Hines books as well, by the way. I have.
Oh, they're terrific. Yeah.
I have basically I have a shelf of Odyssey up there. I even have a pop-up book. But no, I'm not surprised at all. I think the things that it did well tried to do well, were costumes. An attempt was made, and the setting was great. I think the 90s was a fabulous time to be interested in CGI, questionable CGI. And what I think it does also quite well are the bits on Ithaca, and actually the fact that it includes the telemachy, the bits where he goes and speaks to Nestor. Bits of that are there too, so they're not ignored, which happens in so many retellings. Just focus on Odysseus is getting home, which they don't even reflect that it's a narrative that he is telling, so we don't even know if it's true. But at least that one has the Phaeacians in it that he's telling the story to. So it uses those parts as really important parts of the story. But then it does things like it leaves out the sirens. It absolutely mangles. Oh, it leaves out the Kukonas as well. It mangles the Iliad into some kind of just bizarre medieval warfare where this great bit where like a chariot explodes for no reason, and Odysseus is saving a child that's miraculously crying on the battlefield of Troy, which is highly ironic, seeing as he literally has the job of punting the child of Hector to its death later on. So like they are trying to make Odysseus the nice guy that we like, but then he's got this like he does this weird like I'm a Greek waiter dance, big wink to Polyphemus, and he has, oh my god, he goes on about don't eat me, you'll eat the magic in my head, and then the bit where they're escaping under the sheep, that is not there, and oh my god, and then sexy golden Hermes, the campest man in existence, and what else? Oh, Aeolus, king of the winds, oh my god, he's like some kind of, I don't know what he is. Really, it's
but weird. despite all these things, it still works for you.
All those things. I mean, I will explain that when I put this on in class, which I haven't done in a while, I give my students like a bingo sheet of all the things that happen in the Odyssey, and then they have to tick off what happens in the film, and then they're like, oh, Oh, okay. So most of it's not there. And also,
Right.
why was this decision made? Yeah, but it had such fun. Like it makes Circe's palace kind of Egyptian, which is an interesting idea. I think to try and bring in maybe the lotus, she gives him flat. I don't know, because they don't have the lotus. That's the thing though. That is the baseline, and it's not great. And so
I'm gonna have to revisit it because I have not seen it since I was.
it is 6 hours.
I remember watching it in the 90s because I was so excited that they were making one, and I thought Armando Sante was like, oh yeah, he's not bad, but yeah, I haven't seen it in 20
I think he's
years,
great.
so.
But I think the script is bad, and I
Yeah.
think he did his best. He's a fabulous guy. I really do see him as Odysseus. There's a great cartoon that my husband introduced me to called Ulysses 31, which is I think a French-Japanese cartoon from the 80s, which is a space opera version of the Odyssey. But in that they make Odysseus so nice that he's basically Aeneas, like just being a nice guy all the time. And then there's what else? Oh, The Return that came out a couple of years ago, and I was really lucky enough to be invited to see that at the British Museum with the Ralph Fiennes, who plays Odysseus, and the director.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I went with my wonderful friend Caroline Lawrence, who wrote the Roman Mysteries. And these fantastic books that are ever so well. She's a great classicist. She wrote these amazing children's books, and they're really, really famous. And she was hissing in my ear the whole time. That's not what happens. And it is not the Odyssey. And it is actually terrible. I really didn't like it. I'm so sorry.
Oh, really? Interesting. Okay. Tell me about, because I remember I did see The Return and I enjoyed it. I mean, it's very earthbound. They've stripped out all the gods. It's I thought he did a good job. Ralph Fiennes as Odysseus. I enjoyed the content. There were elements of it that I liked.
Yes.
I didn't love it as a whole, but I thought they were doing some interesting things. But what about it didn't work for you?
I mean, it was a bit of a come down from what it seemed to be in the trailer. So the trailer made it look like they were doing, and I was really excited because part of the Odyssey set text that we teach is the second half, the Iliad, the Ithaca half. I thought, finally a film that focuses on that. And the way they presented it in the trailer, it looked like it was that, but with it was Odysseus, but he was John Wick. And then he wasn't even Odysseus as John Wick. It was just naked Odysseus, being a bit wiry, wandering around. There's no one on Ithaca. If they are, they're cowering in tents. The suitors are just these pretty boys who've got lost on the way to Love Island, and with their towel of the only item of clothing they have. Why must the costumes suffer? I ask you, because between that and the Nolan one, those are the things that have disappointed me the most. Because the ancient world, as we know, was full of color. We know statues were painted. This is basic knowledge now. It wasn't 20 years ago, but it is now. And we have so many visual references. There's so much art. Why are all the costumes just pieces of white cloth? I'm just so disappointed. Even the costumes in Troy were better. And Troy story something awful. But I think, honestly, if you'd asked me about the Iliad, I would have said, well, I think Troy was the director's cut, not the cinema version. The director's cut makes a lot more sense. And I think that is a problem as well. You can't fit the Odyssey or the Iliad in a 2-hour film, or even a 3-hour film. And they did the readings aloud in the 2010 or something. They did a reading of the Iliad at the British Museum with the Almeida Theatre, and every half chapter or so was read by a different actor, and it was stupendous. Brian Cox, who was Agamemnon in Troy, read book 2, the catalogue of ships, right? He made it interesting. It was amazing. It took about 17 hours, right? And that was the Iliad. And the Odyssey they did a few years later, and they did it walking around London, so like it was traveling. And I think that took about 12. So you can't fit it all into a film. And I understand that. And I have let go of this idea that I will get a perfect Odyssey film or even series, because you can't really put it in a film without changing certain things. But there are things you really shouldn't change, like what happens, because that's already really good. That's why it has survived. It's not, you don't need to change that. You can tweak fun things. You can change the setting. Like Anytime puts on a Shakespeare play, they don't put it in Shakespearean outfits. You could have fun with that aspect. But that's always the first thing to like just be, we'll just stick them in whatever people expect from the ancient world, and we don't know it, and then we'll just mess about with the story. And that really bites me a lot, actually. So I'm really excited that the film coming out will have apparently the structure, because that is something that is so often just thrown out the window. Like the 97 miniseries starts with Troy and goes through, ignores the structure completely, but does have aspects of what happens in the early story. And Nolan is really good with twisty plots, so you would expect that's why, really.
Sure.
Apparently he was meant to direct the Iliad, Troy. Back then, he was mooted to, which I didn't know before. So if we get that will be great. And I think his casting choices have been really interesting. I mean, it's a Hollywood film. We're getting a Hollywood cast. It was never going to be
the Matt Damon. I'm hoping he's.
But Matt Damon, he was really good in The Martian. So I'm hoping it's like, he's lost, he's on an island, but I don't know. Even with the trailer, he cries well. There's a lot of crying. Maybe that's it. But I don't know. He's too blonde and
he's too American.
And too American.
Odysseus. Yeah, I'm sorry.
People keep talking about, Telemachus calls him dad, and that's really shaken me out of it. And I don't know. I mean, I suppose if you were translating it for a modern audience, you would use words like that. But at the same time, what are they trying to make? That's what I want to know. It's clearly not historical. It's not really mythological, although the gods are in it. As the rest of, like, the Greek culture doesn't seem to be at all present. So is it a fantasy version of the Odyssey? And is that all right, really? Because it's not fantasy, it's myth. Myth has culture at the heart of it. It has history and storytelling and culture. And what are we going to get? I'm terrified, really.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful that it will be good. Like every movie I go to the theater, I want it to be the best one I'm seeing at that moment. But I'm also a little skeptical, especially for this one, because it's a story that is so near and dear to our hearts. At the same time, I appreciate Nolan's ambition in all the other things that he's done, and he's a smart filmmaker. So I know it'll certainly be worth chatting about all the decisions he made and perhaps why he made them, and whether they land or not, we'll find out. I don't know if you've seen, in terms of the casting choice, I'm not totally sold on Matt Damon, but I don't know if you saw the Netflix series Troy, Fall of a City.
The BBC series, Troy.
Oh, it was a BBC?
Okay. Yeah, okay. I was so hyped for that. And then I watched the first episode and was destroyed by the bizarre decisions to first include the gods and then not include the gods. And then, I gave up on that pretty quickly. And I think a lot of people did too. It was kind of nothingy. So like, why can't we have both costumes and a really good film?
Right.
Did you like it?
I was just gonna say, it was hit or miss. It was I was confused by some of the choices about at the beginning. It's like, oh, Paris, they are doing the Judgment of Paris. That's interesting. And then some of the casting decisions were interesting. The fact that they wanted to lean so much into Paris was kind of weird, but I did like the fellow who played Odysseus. Like that visual is sort of like, oh, that's good casting. And I liked him.
Far in at all. And I wanted to show it in class, and the first thing they did was having Paris having sex with a nymph. So I'm like, well, that's going to be hard to include now. Thank you for that choice. But no, I'm maybe I was too hasty. I like to think I've mellowed since that, because that was a few years ago now, wasn't it? But yeah, maybe I should give that another whirl. I think I clearly need to lower my standards, Lex. That's basically what I've learned over the last 20 years. What I would really like is I, having written this book, I kind of think it'd be fun to make a slightly not very serious series where someone's reading it like in the beginning of The Princess Bride, and someone's reading it to their kid, and the kid's like, well, I know that story. And they go, well, what if this happened? And then we go off and we watch a different version of the Odyssey each episode, having a go at different versions of Odysseus. That's what I would like. And then maybe every so often an episode could be entirely animated. And then the next week, maybe they're all played by Muppets. I don't know. I think an unserious version where you could really get into the nitty gritty and do lots of different versions of it would perhaps be a more exciting way of accessing this text than just trying to make something that appeals to the base denominator of white statues.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess the good thing is that, I mean, your book, this movie, your podcast, the interest of different adaptations, it's not going anywhere. Like we're gonna keep getting lots of great interpretations of it and playing around with it, because it's the greatest story ever told. I know they use that for a different book, but that's the one I'm using for this one.
That's what it says on the front of my 1938 copy of Rouse, I think.
Okay, good. Yeah. Well, this has been really fun. I really appreciate you hopping on to Chalk, all things Odyssey. Are there any projects in the pipeline for you that you can tell us about, or where folks should be going to get more of all that you have to offer?
Oh, very kind. Well, you can always pop on to greekmythcomics.com. Most of my links are there, or laurajenkinsonbrown.co.uk is where I have most of my Are Odysseus stuff and the podcast. But essentially, if you search it up, you will find it. The book is available wherever you can order your books, as is the ebook, and the podcast you can find on pretty much any podcast platform, which is great. And in terms of projects right now, just finishing off the podcast, getting to Ithaca, which is really exciting, because I'm really hoping that will help a lot of people understand what happens on Ithaca, because that is such an underwritten version, part of the story when it comes to modern retellings of it. And I do hope to do You Are Telemachus, You Are Penelope at some point. But other than that, I hope to be drawing a lot more comics about the Odyssey this summer as well, and helping people understand what to expect, and then probably writing many think pieces about whatever Nolan gives to us.
Oh, that's great. I look forward to those.
The fantastic Odyssey books that are coming out this summer as well. I have friends who've been commissioned to write superb books about Odyssey reception. Erica Moan's book, The Odyssey Effect, is coming out next month. Liv Albert, who does the Let's Talk About Myths Baby, has written the most phenomenal kids retelling of the Odyssey that also has all the background you could wish for, and it's also beautiful. I know Joel Christensen's got another book coming out again about the Odyssey and the way it's retold and why it's so important. It's so exciting that the film being made by this amazing director has then been this great catalyst for everyone going, well, let's all pile in and do it. I think there's even a self-help book based on the Odyssey coming out, and that might be pushing it a bit far, but I'm intrigued. And hey, for me, because I started writing this in 2019. So
yeah, no, it's great. It's all those things are something to look forward to. And again, yeah, for those who want their own adventure, I highly recommend this. It's super fun. You Are Odysseus. I'm going to dive back into it because there are so many different paths one can take. It's terrific. So thank you for writing it and all that. Say that again.
You need some sticky tabs.
Yes. Well, I'm going to download those bookmarks.
Yes.
From your website. And that'll help me get through it. So anyway, Jenks, thank you so much. This was super fun.
Oh,
and I hope both of us enjoy the Odyssey, the movie.
Absolutely.
And of course.
And best of luck with your book Kickstarter. Best of luck with your comic Kickstarter. I can't wait for that next installment.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Shop Talk, brought to you by Kid Beowulf Odyssey. Funding now at kidbcomickickstarter.com.